started recording. Um, okay, and I am sharing my screen. One second. So once again, good morning and welcome to another session of Azure Power Lunch. Today's topic is server-side encryption with customer managed key for Azure Managed Disk. It's a very long topic, but it's a very important topic. I mean, in the name itself. And by the way, the slide deck and the presentation will be available at our YouTube channel. So first of all, what is encryption at rest in Azure? This is one of the key feature. The data and almost all the services in Azure is encrypted at rest. But what we use system keys by default. So for example, if you put data in storage, it is using system keys, and what it does is it encrypt the data using system keys. And by the way, this is symmetric encryption. You have a key that is used to encrypt a part of the data or the entire data. That same key is used to decrypt that data. Okay. Um, why do we need this encryption at rest? Okay. I mean, I don't think that has to be said, but just to kind of recap, um, in the case if somebody is able to access where the data is stored, let's say a disk or some way, a hacker or attacker or a malicious user, and they try to access that data, if the data is unencrypted, they can attach that to a device, and of course they can read the data. But if the data is encrypted, in that case, that becomes very hard. Okay. When we talk specifically in terms of Azure, there are certain government regulations that require that your data has to be encrypted, like HIPAA, PCI, and all that. And also in Azure, although we take all the measure to protect your data, and we have services to make sure the access to where the customer data is stored is kind of secured, but at the same time, there are overlapping measures to protect the data. For example, of course, there are physical securities there, but encryption at rest provide another security level where for some reason, if somehow somebody like even stole that disk and try to access the data, they won't be able to do it because the data is encrypted and they can. So just to quickly recap the conversation. Okay. Here are the encryption model. The model on the left is the default. Most services use that model from the get-go. In that model, basically what happens is your data, if it's in a storage account or database, it is encrypted by at rest using Microsoft managed keys. These are Microsoft keys. Microsoft manages their, we're behind the scene, we're rotating those keys and doing all the things that we need to do, but the data is encrypted by those keys. Okay. For some customers, this is not enough. They want data to be encrypted by their own managed key. In that case, Key Vault comes into picture. They put their keys in Key Vault, and then they encrypt that data using the what they call customer managed key, and they control that, they rotate it, and all that. So that's their responsibility. They take care of all that. Okay.
Now,
Yes, sir.
yeah, just a quick question. I mean, we did face this kind of scenario with the customers. Um, these encryption at rest is not uh, protected from all services. So it's open for any Azure service. So even if it is encrypted, any Azure service can access the data. If we can provide a way to kind of restrict to a specific Azure services, that would be more useful for customers. So some of the customers, they said, oh, it's open for open to any Azure service, so it's not really encrypted. So how do we
I
encrypt
think
that?
that's a good question, but I think that depends on the method of access because I mean, the service may have access to the data, but not the unencrypted data. I mean, it still have to access the key vault, especially with the second one, not the first one, but the second one. If we
Right.
start the service side encryption using customer managed key, if that service which is trying to access your data has access to the key vault, then yes, then in that case you will have that issue. Otherwise, I don't think it will be able to encrypt the data. But definitely, I mean, we can discuss it offline. But
Sure.
yeah, so I mean, this is that that is exactly to protect that scenario where customer says, you have your keys. I mean, if your keys are compromised, your data is compromised, I'm going to bring my own keys. So that's where they bring it in. And, and that's where they say that we are going to be bringing our own keys. And the third model, that is server-side encryption where you don't use key vault. And that's where you bring your keys from on-prem. That's one way of doing it. The most popular is, of course, or what I say, easier to use is the middle one. If you want to bring your own customer managed keys, and of course, you can do client level encryption. You can encrypt data using your own methods, which is separate from the server side or the storage side encryption. Okay, quickly, and here is the model. This is very important to understand. What is the encryption model? How this encryption happens? Okay, you have key vault where your keys are either generated or stored. You have Active Directory, which is basically providing authentication and authorization to access the keys, whoever wants to access it, or whatever resource, Azure resource provider they want to access that. Then you have data encryption key. That is the key that is used to encrypt the data, okay? And that key is basically, and let's go into the next, yeah. So that key um, is actually encrypting and decrypting the data on the partition. There may be multiple keys for that. Then you have a key encryption key. That's an interesting thing. It's like you hide something and then you have the where you have hidden that key, you hide that thing as well. So it's kind of a double level of control, but it makes things simple. So what happens is your key encryption key is basically coming out of key vault. Okay, if somebody has access to data, they cannot decrypt it because they need to access data encryption key, and in order to decrypt that, they will have to have key encryption key, and that is in your key vault. So that's the level. That's how kind of this encryption work. And one other thing is, since you can rotate your key encryption key, and what it will do is it will re-encrypt your data encryption key, but it will not change it. So whenever you rotate your key, it will not cause your entire data to decrypt and then re-encrypt, which would be a big problem. So that's how kind of this whole encryption mechanism works. Just keep that in mind as we move on to um, the actual heart of our topic, which is server-side encryption with customer managed key. Okay, why this is important? When this thing started, managed key, if everybody remember with Azure history, we started with disk, which were based on storage accounts. So if you want to create a disk, they used to be called unmanaged disk. You carve it out from a storage account, and basically it kind of introduces certain challenges where you have IOPS limitations. So you have to make sure that you only carve out certain number of disks from a storage account. Then came the managed disk, which took away all of that away from the user. Management of disk was taken care of by Microsoft. They said, Azure, we're going to create those disks for you. The disk, and you just say size of the disk and all. The data for that disk was encrypted by system managed key in the storage account, which is behind the scenes. So there is a storage account even for the managed disk, but it is hidden from the user. And the data on that storage account is encrypted by Microsoft managed key. So that's kind of wasn't acceptable for customer. They wanted to use their own managed keys, and they started doing it at the level of the disk itself, using BitLocker and utilities like DM Encrypt for Linux. But that is not the storage level. This is once again at the client level. Then this thing is launched, which now allow you to encrypt those managed disks at the storage level using your customer managed key. And the way it works is very interesting. Now you, instead of just having a key and having a key vault, you have a first class resource provider, which is called Disk Encryption Set. It is a combination of key and a key vault. So you either create a key in the key vault or import a key in the key vault from wherever you have it. And then you create this disk encryption set, and we're going to see a demo. I just want to go over the theoretical step. And then you associate this disk encryption set with the disks that you create. Okay. One key thing to remember is that this disk encryption set, when you create it, you will be asked to give reader access to the key vault, because whenever you are encrypting disk, it will need to get access to key vault to read remember, your key encryption key to encrypt the data encryption keys for those disks. Okay, so that's will be a requirement. So this is how, kind of a quick summary. Azure Storage account, whenever it will you are about to do encryption, it will generate a disk encryption key, and this is a system key. This is you have no control over it. What you do is you request to either kind of a decrypt or to encrypt DE key with customer with the key encryption key, which is coming out of the key vault. This is customer key. This is basically it's not from. I mean, Microsoft doesn't have a control over it. It is provided by the customer, either generated into the key vault or put in the key vault there. Okay, and that's where you encrypt that key, and that is used. That's where you encrypt that data encryption key, and which is used to encrypt the disk, the managed disk. Okay, so that's the kind of the whole process, and that's kind of explain it here in more detail, where you're going through step by step, and it all of that is kind of taken care of here. So what we're going to do is we're gonna quickly do a quick small demo to and we will take a look. In the meantime, any questions? Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do encryption set. So there is a first-class resource called Disk Encryption Set. Put simply, when you start with a disk encryption set, it's going to ask for you for a resource group. Let's say we use an existing one. It's going to ask for a name. We're going to call it. And it's going to ask for a region. Pretty usual. That's where things get interesting. Key vault and a key. So it will ask you for a key vault. Either you can create a new one or you can use an existing one. I'm going to use an existing one. And then either you can create a new key or existing key. What you can also do is load a key that you have somewhere in an HSM into Key Vault, okay, for this purpose, okay. So that you can, in this case, I already have a key. So I'm just going to use that key.
So,
and I'm going to use,
hey, Naveen.
Go ahead, please.
Naveen, is this a key you loaded up? Is a CMK key you're thinking from a customer side?
That's right.
If
Yes.
it's a customer.
Yes.
And then this,
That's
and
right.
this key, this key is key encryption key, right? Or data encryption.
That
key.
is absolutely right. Data encryption key you don't have access to. That is system managed. Key encryption key you have access to, and you use it to encrypt the data encryption key.
Right. So
you see,
I just want to confirm the CMK itself, meaning that is a key encryption key from the customer.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
Okay.
Because the thing is, if for a second, I mean, and that's how, I mean, almost all of the customer managed encryption work everywhere. The reason is, let's say that for a minute, we think that you're going to be providing the data encryption key. Think of it. You have terabytes, petabytes of data, okay? And you change the key, rotate it. What's going to happen? It's going to decrypt the entire petabytes of data and then re-encrypt it. That's not very practical. So that's why you have, this type of behavior where you have key encryption key and you have the data encryption key. Okay, so we select it and then
quick question there.
Sorry.
So that means that Microsoft always owns the data encryption keys.
Yes, that is system managed.
Okay, and they can always access those data encryption keys even if I use key encryption keys to protect them.
No, that's the thing. Since it is generated by Microsoft, but it is encrypted. So even so think of it. We have that key, but key encryption key encrypts it. Okay. So at that point, we don't see those keys. That's kind of generated in that particular moment, and we are encrypting it. So basically, we don't see those keys. So the data for us is like a jumble of bytes.
Okay.
Navid, just a generic use case, right? Most of the time, databases uses the managed disk. So in that case, can we implement this server-side encryption inside the database? Or, for example, Oracle is accessing all these managed disks. So the customer actually very keen on securing or encrypting the data, right? So in that case, if we can use this, they don't have to encrypt the whole disk.
Okay, so exactly. The thing is, normally you use overlapping encryption over there. So you may have, let's say you're running Oracle on a VM. So you will have encryption at the servers. For the VM disk, managed disk, you have encryption, and then you may have encryption at the database level as well. Because these are serving different purpose. One is to protect the underlying platform integrity, and platform means like at the OS level or at the storage level. The second one is encrypting the data from somebody who has access to the database maliciously, but once again, they won't be able to access because there is some encryption at the database level.
Got it.
So
thank you.
yeah. So okay. So if we do a review and create, it's gonna create it. And by the way, I just want to show you the creation. It's gonna take a second. While it is creating, I'm going to show you this one. This is another disk encryption set that we have already created. And there you can change the encryption key. There is nothing much to it, except I want to show you something here. This disk encryption set has access to, so it has a managed identity behind the scene, which has access to this key vault. So this is the key vault where I'm storing my keys. And as you can see here, this is the app. So this is basically a managed identity that is created behind the scene, and that has a reader access to the key vault. So that's just the Azure AD connection and access to that data and all. So that's what it does here. Okay. With that, let's go. Sorry. Okay. So if we go to the resource that we just created, let's take a look. You see, to associate disk, image, or snapshot, you must grant permission to this key vault. Okay, so it's asking you once you click on it. So either you do it by clicking here, or you manually give it access. You have to do it, otherwise it will not work. So that's something, just very open. Second thing, let's see how the experience look like when we create a virtual machine. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a VM, and let's do this. And let's say, and I'm going to name it South Central, and I'm just gonna go to the disk. I just want to show the disk experience. You see that by default it's encrypted by the platform managed key, but if you want to use customer managed key, you can use these two. There are two disk encryption set. You can pick one and you can do it. Same thing. If I want to create a new disk, same thing. It's gonna ask me what it is this, and you can use this disk encryption set to do that. Okay.
And
go ahead.
Quick question there: is this only set during disk creation? Can it be updated at a later time?
You can do it existing disk as well.
Okay.
Yes.
And that
so
will re-encrypt all the data?
No, that's the key part. So basically what will happen, okay, let me take it back. Yes, it will re-encrypt the data, because the thing is, you will have, sorry, it will just re-encrypt that key, to make sure that the data stays, and because it will basically take over that customer managed, the system key, and encrypt it. So nobody can access that key anymore. Okay. Except your disk encryption set. Okay. Let me quickly show you something here, which is very interesting, and you will find it kind of a bit strange, but that's the way this thing works. So this is a VM that I have already created just to save time, and I'm just looking at the disks. Look at that, encryption not enabled. Because please keep in mind the encryption here is the OS level encryption. For example, if it's a Linux VM, it's DM encrypt. If it's a Windows VM, it is BitLocker. That is not enabled. You can enable it if you want, but that encryption is not enable for this particular VM. If you want to see if that disk is encrypted, click on the disk and then click on the encryption here, and that will tell you yes. Yes, this is encrypted with customer managed key. And just keep in mind, once it's encrypted, if you want to change to the platform managed key encryption, you will have to basically detach the disk and reattach it. This is basically to avoid a security hole where somebody can detach the disk, can change it to platform managed key and then try to access it. So basically you have to detach it, then change the encryption, and then come back to it and reattach it. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. And this works with scale sets as well, because before with the disk encryption, there was it did not work with Linux VM scale set as far as I remember. But this one works with scale sets as well. So if you want to create a VM scale set, it will work with that as well. So we have 3 minutes remaining. Any questions?
Naveed, any performance impact that you think we should be aware of with the CMK versus?
Not that I heard of, because the way it works is, you're not re-encrypting the entire data set. It is only encrypting the keys. So of course, encryption will have some impact, but since it's the storage service encryption, it will happen at the storage level. So you will be you won't feel it.
Hey, Naveed, what are the typical key change process here? Should we have the user to go back to the encryption sets to change the keys?
Yep, that is exactly right. Sorry, I have a slide here towards the end. Because of time, I did not put it. You see, so you have to go there and change the key version, and then it will re-encrypt the data encryption keys.
And that so does that data encryption key can change, or it's remains unchanged?
That will not change, because what happens is if that changes, then the whole data will have to be encrypted, re-encrypted, because that is encrypted. Okay. Just keep those limitation or restrictions in mind, like in regards to how does encryption work. There are some restriction for cross subscription, so just keep that in mind. Like what are some of the limitations? So just that as you are encrypting the data, just keep that. Go ahead. Any questions?
Just regarding DR scenario, is it going to impact the DR, or is the same key should be used on the other side too, right?
That's a good question. I think there is something about DR in this, and I don't remember exactly. So I have 2 resources. If you reach me offline, I will be happy to answer that. But there are 2 resources. I think the second one should address the DR scenario. I have read it somewhere, but I don't have the answer right now. I don't want to give you the wrong answer. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we're right at the hour, 1 minute above. I'm really sorry. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to ask. I will stay. Okay. Thank you very much for joining, and see you for another Azure Power Lunch session next week. And happy Friday, everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thanks, Naveed.
Thank you.
Thank you.